Hello, and welcome to the Looking Forward Show. I'm really excited to be here again. I say that and lead off with every show with I'm excited, and I really get energized by being in the studio again and with two great guests that we have coming on today. I'm really excited about Lou Narvaez, Eastern Regional Director of Parole Field Services for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And we have a very special guest we're going to be talking a lot to today. Somebody that's been, I consider, a good friend. Movita Johnson Harrell is going to be with us today, and she's going to be sharing her journey and her story. But before we begin, this is you're listening to Looking Forward, and I'm really excited again to be here. You can listen to us on Philly Cam TV. We're live streaming. We're on Xfinity 66 and 966. We're on Vios TV 29 and 30 and Roku, Apple and Apple TV, and also Facebook. So welcome, everybody. As anyone that's not joined the show before, welcome for the first time. This is a show about justice and criminal justice and justice in general and things that people really need to know when they get justice involved. And it's for families. It's for individuals that have gone through the system. It's for kids. It's for anyone that wants to learn about how to navigate the challenges of our systems and how to change some of the systemic problems that we have within our justice system itself. So again, my name is Jeff Abramowitz. I'm your host of the show. We are really going to be diving into today the topic of words matter. And words matter is something that came to me in a project that I've been working on with the Philadelphia Inquirer over the last several months. And in this project, we've been talking with editors as well as community activists and community leaders about how the words that we use in the media, the words that we use in our normal life, have an impact on the way we see the world and the way we deal with our justice systems and problems. So it's really important that when we think about words, that we really think about what it's not what you say, it's often what you hear, right? And it's often different for many people. But words do matter. And in the context of words mattering, we're going to really be talking to people that both people have experience in the criminal justice field and have really gone through the dynamic of what happens when someone says something that's offensive and the trigger that happens. So we'll talk about a little about that. We're also going to talk about and get an update from Lou Narvaez about the Pennsylvania probation and parole and what's happening in our prison systems. So I'm really looking forward to a great show today. We're going to be right back. And our first guest today is going to be Lou Narvaez. We're back and looking forward, and welcome to the show, Lou Narvaez. Lou is the Eastern Regional Director of Parole Field Services, and we've been doing the show for 3 years, and he finally told me a few weeks ago that I've gotten his title all wrong, so I got it right today. We've been making an effort at that, but he has been a great friend of the shows and been on quite often, just about every show. You haven't barely missed one. But Lou, how are you?
I'm fine, Jeff, and I thank you as always for having me on here. Thank you very kindly.
Oh, it's my pleasure. So let's start off. I always try to get an update from you about what's going on in the system and how we're faring. We're starting to see a lot more people vaccinated and people starting to get out a little bit, taking the mask down in public, and we're easing some restrictions. But how are we doing within the system itself?
Well, within the system, we're doing really well. Secretary Wetzel took the point on making sure that not only the staff were being vaccinated, but also the inmates in the institutions were being vaccinated. And in doing that, that sort of speaks to how proactive he has been and is in trying to move us forward in a positive direction as far as how we interact with those individuals who are incarcerated at the various SCIs. On the field side of the house, we continue to look at the number of cases and average caseloads that we have to agents. And that's a very important factor because the more cases you have as an agent or even a probation officer in local jurisdictions, you know, the more you become involved in paper chases opposed to actually being able to sit down and have meaningful interaction with the person that you're supervising. We're looking at starting specialized caseloads that will address some of the violence and particularly gun violence in the Philadelphia area. We're looking at our mental health and sex offender caseloads, constantly making sure that there's an equalization in the distribution of cases amongst the agent. And once again, that's just not from a data perspective, but from a humane perspective, because it gives you more time as an agent to have quality interaction with that individual. So they're looking at reopening basically in July, going, we've never been closed. We've worked, but on modified schedule, and we modified policies and practices. But our agents have always been in the field throughout the pandemic. We have worked every day, whether it's home or in the field. And kudos to all my agents for being as flexible as they have been, because we've been constantly modifying policies and practices to comport with the coronavirus and the different protocols that we needed to put in effect to mitigate the virus amongst ourselves.
Yeah, we noticed. I heard yesterday on the radio that recently they're starting to do some visitation in some of the
Yes,
SDIs across the Commonwealth, which
yes,
I thought was a great sign. You know, getting
yes,
families back and reconnected again. Wow, what a
right,
difference that's going to make.
absolutely.
Some people haven't
Yeah,
seen their family what over a year, well over a year
yeah,
and a half, maybe.
yeah, and they're trying to also increase the cohort that they can have when they're in their dorms and in their cell areas. They're looking at that because they realize that individuals have to interact, but safety has been the main driver. Safety has been the main driver throughout the coronavirus, and that's hard, even though it's something we're doing in people's best interest, whether it's staff or whether it's the inmates. It's a hard thing for an inmate to swallow, because this is a very structured environment, and there are many limitations pre-COVID, and now during COVID there were much more limitations put on them. So, you
Yeah,
know,
Mr. Narvaez, can you talk a little bit? I know I'd seen Secretary Wetzel a few weeks ago, and he mentioned that they'd gotten J&J vaccine and that they were giving that enough for the entire prison system. And I'm wondering, are you aware of how many people have gotten vaccinated, and what percentage of inmates and what percentage of officers have gotten vaccinated in the system?
no, I can't share that information because I don't know that. That's on the DOC side of the house. I'll say that was made available to all, but you have to remember we cannot force people to take the vaccination as no one else can. But I know it's been made available, and I don't want to misrepresent, so I won't give a number because I
No
don't
worries.
know.
So I'm going to tell you that yesterday I had the privilege of being part of a job fair with Chicky and Pete's. So I got to give them a shout but
Okay,
Chicky and Pete's had us a number of jobs that were open, and they invited us up to at Jev's to come up and do a job fair with them on site on Roosevelt Boulevard at their store up there. And one
okay,
of the things that we're beginning to see is we're seeing more and more employers that are looking for talent, that are looking for men and women to get back to the workforce. And there's
right.
almost like it feels like there's this tremendous shortage out there of people that want to
Yes.
get back. And I'm wondering what you're seeing from the ground as far as men and women that are coming home that are under your supervision and getting back to work.
Well, we are seeing that there, especially in the food industry, the restaurant industry, there has been a shortage in people returning for multiple reasons. Some people still have their unemployment benefits, or some people are leery of returning to that environment because one of the biggest concerns about the food industry, whether it's the supermarkets or restaurants, is that they don't know who has been vaccinated. So someone could
Mm.
come into that department store or restaurant and not have been vaccinated and place the person at risk. So that's part of the things we're seeing as to why there's an opening. And naturally, when we become aware of openings, we naturally refer our people to those type of environments to see if they're interested in applying and if they'll be accepted.
So
Yes.
tomorrow morning, first thing, you're going to get a laundry list for me of all
Okay.
the jobs that we have open. We're looking to place
I look
because
forward to it.
we
I
got
look
more
forward
jobs
to
than
it.
people, and we need some people. So we'll get those to you. Um,
Okay.
Thank you so much. So I'm curious too, a little bit about First of all, we're starting to see the doors open a little bit, and I do think that we lose something when there's not that personal touch. When you don't see
Absolutely.
someone. And are you planning, or your officers planning to do more live one-on-ones and start check-ins with people now?
Oh, absolutely. But first, just for the sake of clarification, they were doing one-on-ones on all of our high-risk population,
Hmm.
and they were doing one-on-ones with other individuals where the need may have presented itself. They were just modifying where they would do virtual in addition to the person-to-person. Keep in mind that all of our agents have vehicles, iPads, iPhones, and their job is to be in the field. We can't supervise behind the desk. So although we modified, we were having contact face to face. It just wasn't to the same degree that it normally had been.
Awesome. You mentioned something earlier that kind of struck me, because one of the things I know that movie is going to be talking about is gun violence in the city, and it continues to escalate. And there's not a day that goes by that it doesn't hit my radar screen. One of our clients
Mm.
or someone that we know that's been shot at, or was a victim of gun violence. And I'm wondering what you mentioned a program that you're thinking about, or will be launching. Can you give us more on that?
Sure. Well, first of all, we're in the embryonic stages of developing the caseloads. So we're very early in the stages. But the other thing, which I'll bring in, which you're aware of, we do have the call-in schedule for June 29th. And that's in the program where we'll bring in the serious parolees who have committed some serious offenses. And we'll have the Attorney General from the Eastern Part, the DA, hopefully police representation, and we'll sit down people from the DOC and we'll tell them the consequences if they incur another arrest of a violent nature. But at the same time, we'll have service providers present that would tell them this is the way we can assist you in the event that you're willing to modify your behavior. Here's the resources and people that are willing to work with you, and the service providers will be there. As far as the caseload, as you're correct, what happened is we had identified uh, several years ago, maybe 2018, that there was a spike in crime in the West Philadelphia police districts, the first, the 19th, the 12th, and so forth. And so what we did was apply for a grant to augment the call-in program, which we received. But even separate from that, the intense caseloads that I referenced are those individuals who we see as being high risk and need more attention, need more focus, need more time from the agent. And that's why we're looking to begin that as soon as possible. We're working through the mechanics, and that ties into your whole conversation about marginalized populations and the power of words.
Yeah, give it to me. So I know.
Okay,
So one thing I love is that before every show, I usually send you an email and say just a topic. I don't give you what I'm going to ask you, but
right,
I
right.
give you the topic, and you always come back with some great information. And so I'm curious. Go ahead.
Okay.
Your take on words mattering.
So first of all, yeah, as a, on a whole, we have to understand that words can create or words can destroy. Words are very powerful. And to begin the whole concept of marginalized people, that within itself carries a certain connotation with it when you're marginalized, because you're talking about those people who are discriminated against and excluded from social, political, and economical opportunities because of an inequity in the power relationships. But this goes far beyond just a parolee or someone involved in the institution. Culturally, you have the individualist and the collective cultures in any society. The United States, we're involved in the individualist culture where we thrive on the independent individual, the rugged individual, the worth of the individual. And as we have progressed in our many enhancements in the culture, we've become more narcissistic in nature. And our language is a reflective of that. When we teach children how to speak our language, when you go as far as the pronouns themselves, your first person singular is what? Is I, me, my, mine, and myself. That's what we learn first. When you conjugate through the pronouns, you firstly at the bottom of the rung, you get to the third person, they, them, their, theirs, and themselves. You don't get to we, us, our, ours, or ours till you get all the way down to the first person plural. That has an effect on how we process things. That has an effect on how we see people. So when you see a marginalized person, someone from either a different ethnic group or a different sexual orientation, the words are accompanied in most cases with stereotypes. And stereotypes in most cases tend to be negative. Oh yeah, yeah, he an ex-con. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. He's a sex offender. Oh yeah, he has a sexual orientation. So it's seen as a deviation from the dominant society and the dominant culture, and therefore it becomes like the scarlet letter. You're now tagged. You're tagged, and so you have to face all these barriers because these words that are associated with an experience you have in trying to integrate. When I dealt with the Japanese delegation that came to the APPA and came to when they came and met with us in probation, their concept of when somebody got on probation is that the community failed. Something went wrong in the community. So that person is sent back to the community for the community to collectively work with them. But that becomes the difference in the collective culture and the individual culture. We do something wrong in our society, or there's something wrong with you. What'd you do? There's something that's wrong with you as the individual. That's my piece. I'm sticking by it.
There you go. Yeah. So no, I appreciate that. I think part of the discussion that we had with some of the editors in the Inquirer was that it wasn't just about the individual act. It wasn't about
Right.
the crime that was committed. It was the background story. Like, how often do you see an article that dives into the why? What
Right.
led that person to make those choices and those decisions? And that's really where, they needed to look and dig a little bit deeper. Once it's out there and the bell has been tolled, especially in the media, there's no turning back. Once it's out there, people are going to get harmed from whatever's said if it's not truthful and not the full story. And oftentimes, we don't get the full story, and a lot of it's because we live in this world of immediacy now too, right?
Well, that I was, and we were talking about that pre-show. There was a book and I'm dating myself, put out years ago when I was in undergraduate school, and it's Alvin Toffler in the Throwaway Society, and he spoke about the immediacy of things. We strive to achieve things, but then we don't take time to value what we achieve. And you have to understand too that the media is in the business of selling press and keeping up ratings. So
money, 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 money.
Here the Benjamins. So in the process, what happens at times, and not just the media, but this is how stereotypes either have misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, or malicious information. And we've seen that over the last couple of years and how that has impacted on people. I remember hearing stories about the Mexicans that were coming over who were rapists, robbers, murderers. They're going to come over here and do all kind of things. Okay. And, so misinformation, malinformation, whatever the case may be, and that stigma attaches many of the people who re-enter society from the jail. The why isn't as important to a lot of people as to the what. Oh, this is what they did.
Yeah,
because
for sure.
If you figure out the why, then you got to look at things like inequity in housing, education, employment, those type of variables that are systemic in criminality. And this is not me saying because of that they should be given a pass. This is me saying if we want to correct the problem, we got to look at it from a systemic approach and not an individual approach.
Absolutely. So thanks, Lou. Yeah, good take on it all. And words do matter. And we're glad that you're in a position to work with the officers and the people in the DOC. We thank everybody, Secretary Wetzel in particular as well, just for allowing you to come on the show and breaking down those silos. We really appreciate it. So we're here with Lou Narvaez. Thank you very much. Our next guest is going to be Movita Johnson Harrell. We're really I'm very excited to talk and catch up with Movita. And this is Looking Forward. I'm going to be right back. back at Looking Forward, and I am so grateful for Movita Johnson Harrell taking some time today. Movita, how are you? Movita, you there? She was there. She may be a little frozen.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show today.
Oh, it's great to see you. And for those that are listening on radio,
Can you see me?
We can see you perfectly. For those of you that are listening on the radio, which a radio show airs tomorrow at 5 o'clock on WPPM 106.5 FM, Ovi is wearing these wonderful red glasses, which are awesome, and really that smile lights up the room. So thank you. It's great to see you. We've gone back a little bit. I met you. I was trying to think, but I think I met you shortly after I left. I came home from prison, and I was in North Philadelphia. And I don't know if you remember, but you were at an event, and you were talking, and your husband was there, and your grandchildren were there, and I remember just being just totally in awe when I heard a little bit about your story, which I'm hoping you're going to share today. But first, I wanted to start with, how are you? Are you there?
I'm okay, Jeff. I'm grateful.
Yeah,
which is always a good thing, right?
It is. So why don't you tell the people, I usually give a short bio on people, but you know what? I really felt that today I needed to give you some space. And why don't you tell our audience a little bit about your background and your life?
Absolutely. So I come from 5 generations of addicts. There was a running joke in my family. My family used to joke about putting wine and beer in my baby bottle and blowing marijuana in my face. At 8 years old, I actually picked up a drink of my own free will. It was Easter Sunday, March 30th, and my father was murdered in front of family. And in that moment, I lost my father, my mother, and my only brother, because my father died result of a shotgun wound to the chest. My mother then began to suffer with depression and began to self-medicate with drugs and alcohol. And my brother, who was 2 years older than me, he was 11 at the time, developed severe trauma from seeing my father be murdered. And he was labeled with oppositional defiance disorder, and he wound up in and out of juvenile facilities, and then later in and out of adult facilities, had a mental illness that was never properly addressed. His trauma was never properly addressed. And on July 1st, 1991, he was murdered as his 5-year-old son sat in his lap over, my brother was murdered over a girl. So I've always been hyper vigilant. Shortly after my brother, I got clean. I have 26 years in recovery. And I fought, right? I was very hyper vigilant about protecting my children because of my own intimate relationship with homicide. And January 15, 2008, I left Philadelphia because that summer, on a hot July day, my 2 sons, Charles and Dante, were 14 and 16. They came into my bedroom and they said, "Mom, we know 9 boys murdered in that neighborhood." And after I consoled my sons and I told them that I would do everything in my power to protect them, I turned to my husband, Yancey, and I said, "It's time to go." And I moved my family to Lansdowne, Delaware County, block radius, dry town. You can't even buy a beer, and everybody knows everybody's dog's name. And in 2011, February 12, 2011, my son Charles came to Philadelphia to pick us up, and 2 boys walked up to the car that my son was sitting in and put 4 bullets in my son. With someone else. 2 boys had an altercation the day before over a girl, and they thought Charles was the boy coming back to retaliate, and Charles didn't even know these people. So my son, January 13, 2011, my son was murdered, and we created the Charles Foundation. And since then, we've been fighting for our young people, both sides of the gun, right? Because we know that there are a lot of social injustices that lead to gun violence in the first place. The detectives told me that the 2 young men who were 23 and 25 at the time had previous criminal arrest records. They had juvenile records. And the detective said to me blatantly, we knew that these boys were going to wind up killing somebody. We're just sorry it was Charles. They called my son a pure victim. And at that point, I blamed the police, right? Because if you had them and you know that these boys had problems and you did nothing to help them and nothing to save them, then you're part of the problem. So through the Charles Foundation, we have worked nationally, we have worked locally to empower young people to make better decisions other than picking up guns. I got tired of sitting in front of legislators' faces and begging them to help to do the things necessary to save our children. So in 2019, I ran for state representative and I won in a 4-person race. And I went to Harrisburg and I bought the money back. So
we're going to get there in a little bit.
And I know that was a lot, Jeff.
That was a lot. So I have to tell you first that I have a daughter. I was 27 years old, and I can't imagine the loss of a child. I think that's probably any parent, their greatest fear is the loss of a child, and losing Charles probably was, I have to imagine, one of the hardest things that you've ever gone through. But what came out of that was the Charles Foundation. And I was wondering if you could share with us a little bit about the great things that the foundation's been doing.
Absolutely. So the Charles Foundation really happened organically, right? I wasn't planning to start a foundation. I reached out to 2 survivors groups. I did not get the help that I needed. And less than a month after Charles died, because my husband and I are so popular in Philadelphia, we began to receive calls from people when young people were shot and when young people were killed. And we started showing up to crime scenes and showing up at hospitals and supporting families, feeding these families, making sure they had lights on, making sure they could get to appointments with detectives. But then also we began creating problems to not only address the social determinants that lead to gun violence, to empower young people to make better decisions other than picking up guns. So through that organic process, the Charles Foundation formed, and also the Philadelphia CARES model. And CARES is an acronym for Crisis Assistance and Response to Empower Survivors. And I actually, we did that model for 7 years with no funding whatsoever, with the funding out of our own pockets. And in 2018, that strategy was funded, and I took it in Philadelphia District Attorney's Office where it's now. But over the years, what we've done is we do annual activities for child survivors of homicide and adult survivors of homicide. We have family and friends days. We do annual holiday parties where we provide entertainment and food and gifts for our children and their caretakers. We do trips, we do organizing, and we empower people who experience gun violence to become active in the solution as opposed to staying stuck in the depression that can go on as a result of losing someone that you love. We do a Summer Be the Change program where we pay young people who are identified as those to kill or be killed to participate in a 12-week program where we educate them, we empower them, and we give them mentorship. So we've done so many things. It's been an incredible journey. We have a community resource center at 52nd and Walloosen. We actually have a park there that we took over, and we've been beautifying the community. Along with Hassan Freeman, John Dye, Harrell, and the coalition, we fed over 150 people since last May in Philadelphia, and we feed people right out of that park at 52nd and Walloosen. We help the sex workers who wind up there, and we provide condoms and food. We give them clothes, and we just address the people. We address the needs of the people in the community.
So what's so incredible is that this is a band of, it's a band of community people that surround you and that are so devoted to the cause and the work that you do, and such an impact in the community. And you're so loved. I mean, so many people know you in the community and appreciate everything that you do. But it goes deeper than that because, not only the work with the Charles Foundation, but, in January in 2018, you were appointed as supervisor of victim and witness services and restorative justice through the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office and working with DA Krasner. And I'm curious, obviously, I can't think of anyone in the world that'd be more qualified to talk about in that position than yourself. But I'm wondering a little bit about what was your experience like working with DA Krasner?
I actually loved working with DA Krasner. So here's the thing, I'm used to working for myself anyway, right? And I would work with DA, he actually trusted my ability to be able to do the job. And do my job. So through that, he, through his leadership in the district attorney's office, a lot of people talk about how the DA does not care about victims. He absolutely does. And his criminal justice reform platform actually shows how much he cares about the victims. Because what I've had to remind many survivors of, Jeff, is that it could have easily been your kid on the other side of that gun, right? One bad decision, it could have been your kid on the side of that gun. I mean, when we create a situation for our children where we don't educate them, they live in housing scarcity, they live in food deserts, they can't get access to jobs, they can't get access to training, they can't get access to money, then we're going to have a situation like we have right here, right now in Philadelphia, with over a 40% increase in gun violence, right? So working for DA Krasner was a great experience for me because he let me do things like create the CVAC, which is the Crime Victims Assistance Victims Advisory Coalition, where I brought in crime victims from across the spectrum, and we created this advisory coalition where they actually helped with determining policies to come out of the district attorney's office that affect everybody that lives in the city of Philadelphia. So the DA actually did some groundbreaking work in regards to victim services when he brought me in the office. First of all, I was the first Muslim woman ever appointed to a law enforcement organization ever in the city of Philadelphia. I was the first survivor of homicide to ever sit in that seat. And not only am I a survivor of homicide, 5-time survivor of homicide, but I am also a rape survivor and a molestation survivor. So, he brought me into that office and we were able to do some amazing work.
Movita, I want to ask you, where gun violence is it keeps me up at night, and I think a lot about it, as a lot of Philadelphians do. But what's happening? Like, what's the uptick? What's the cause? I know some people like to point fingers, and people have pointed to our DA, people have pointed to the police, people have pointed everywhere except, and I don't know, what are you seeing, and what do you think some of the roots of this problem are, and what should we be doing about it?
So great question. And, we cannot blame the district attorney for the increase in gun violence, right? So the district attorney's office is a prosecutorial office. Do they have a responsibility in being a part of the solution and prevention? Absolutely, just as well as the police department does, right? But if you really look at both of those organizations, reactionary. So if you look at what's happening in Philadelphia the last 20, 30 years, we've disinvested in communities of color, in Black and brown communities. We've disinvested to the point where the public school system is failed our children. A lot of these young people who came through our public school system can't even read and write. We've disinvested in our communities to the point where we live in a university town and we have universities buying up our communities and offering outsiders tax abatements to come into our city to live. But you have people who live in these communities, and when these property values increase, they can't afford to stay here anymore. And what I remind people is that a lot of people think that it's coincidental, and it's absolutely all by design. If you look at what happened during the crack epidemic, right, where people of color were being incarcerated, they were being criminalized for being addicts. Well, we don't see that today with the opioid epidemic, right? So we have a couple of things going on. We have a generation of crack babies who have never had the supports that they need. We have disinvestment in our communities. We have poverty, we have gentrification, because, and you talked about the uptick in violence. So take, for example, South Philadelphia and Southwest Philadelphia, right? Have different communities who beef against each other, who have these wars going on, right? And before, South Philly and Southwest Philly could be beefing, but they wouldn't be on each other's toes, right? There is spatial distance in between them for them to be able to beef. But when you have gentrification, as it happened in South Philadelphia, and it pushed a lot of those people out of South Philadelphia into Southwest Philadelphia on top of one another, there's no spatial social distance in between them. Now you're going to have increased community violence, right? And then when you add on top of that, what we just went through with COVID-19, and people are desperate. So we have an increase in violence like we never had before. But you know what? This was actually predicted back in 2015. In 2013, 14, I participated in focused deterrent strategy. And it was a pilot brought here from college in New York. A guy named David Kennedy created the strategy. And it was brought to Philadelphia by a guy named Brian Lynch, who was head of the gun violence task force in the district attorney's office. So Brian invited me and Yancey to be a part of the strategy, and we were the moral voice of the community. And we began to call these young people in 45 and 50 at a time to a closed courtroom. And you had all of law enforcement on one side, and you had the community on the other side. And these were people who were identified through parole and probation as those likely to kill or be killed. So in this strategy, we did our first call April of 2013. And they that there were two boys in particular, because the pilot happened in South Pacific, that would never, right? We did our first call in April 2013. We went out to dinner after this call-in to celebrate finally being able to get this done. An hour into our celebration, these young people were given one number to call for anything that they need. I literally watched them transform before my eyes when I told my story about Charles. Because when the law enforcement side got up, they talked about throwing football scores at them. They talked about they knew who their connections were in the street. They knew drugs. They knew who their people were in jail. And these young people were looking at them like, and what? I can do a bid, right? Doing the bid is somewhat a badge of honor in the hood. But then the community side got up, and I talked to them as that one woman in their life that loved them. It didn't matter who it was. I told them how I didn't want to die, and I told them about losing my family members to gun violence, more specifically Charles as sitting in the car. And I watched these transform before my eyes. So they sucking their teeth and they slouched down in their seat, and some of them began to tear up, and some of them actually began to cry. And after the phone rang, and it was one of the two boys that those police officers said would never call in for help. And those two boys that they said would never call in, both of them wound up calling through the Goodwill. And the other one, we wind up getting into community college, successful. In the first year of the strategy, we had more than a 35% reduction in gun violence, right? And then the city would not fund the strategy. And after that happened, gun violence began to rise.
Crazy. So Lou, I've been part of the call-in with Lou Narvaez, and they do it at the probation and parole office. They did get some funding for that. And it's been reenacted. I know I've been part of it for a little while now, several years that I've been going down to the call-in. It's been a great program, just that kind of model. We're going to take a quick break because we need to, and there's a lot of information. I want to give people a chance to digest it. But when we come back, we're gonna hear from the first Muslim woman ever elected to the General Assembly in Pennsylvania, Movita Johnson Harrell. We'll be right back. You're listening to Looking Forward. Back. Welcome to Looking Forward, and we're here with Movita Johnson Harrell. And words do matter today. Her words certainly matter, and they impact everyone, I think, that's listening. I know you mentioned this earlier, and I wanted to give you some space for this to talk, but in your journey after you left the DA's office in March of 2019, you had the privilege of representing our state as the first state representative in the 190th district who was a Muslim woman. And I wanted to ask you, was that ever on your radar screen? Did you ever think to yourself, hey, this is what I want to do? I want to become a state representative. Tell us a little about how that came to be and what it was like.
So I never wanted to be a politician, Jeff. I'm a social worker by trade and training. Care for people. I've done that 5 years of my adult life. But the thing for me was, I had the opportunity through the Charles Foundation and my activism and my advocacy, I've had the opportunity to go around the country, right? Speaking to legislators about gun violence and about protecting our young people and about making a change for them so that they could be successful. And I was tired of hearing the same old rhetoric, right? And I originally ran the first time in 2016. And when I ran because I wanted to change the narrative, I wanted the people who were in that campaign cycle talking about the issues and addressing the issues that matter to the people who need the help. And I was very successful. I didn't win that race, but I was very successful in changing the narrative of that race and getting people to listen to what I was saying and also to look what was happening in our communities. But what happened was I went into the district attorney's office, and I went into the district attorney's office not because of job. District Attorney Larry Krasner said that he would work with me to get it was called Focused Deterrence. It's actually called Group Violence Intervention, to get that strategy back. And that's why the DA's office. And in November of 2018, we had an agreement with the mayor's office and to apply for a $500,000 grant from PCCD. And 4 days before the grant submission, the managing director's office and the mayor's office pulled out. So Brian Lentz and I had been doing focus groups and target groups and, working groups to improve on the strategy. And then the opportunity for the funding was just gone. So a month later, the party tapped me to run for state representative. And that's why I ran, because I figured I'd go up to Harrisburg and bring the money back myself. And to be quite frank, Jeff, I got tired of begging people to do the right thing.
So you didn't just win; you slammed it. You had 66% of the vote in a 4-person race, which is unheard of in Philadelphia in that kind of a race. And you did get up, and I wanted to show for people that are home. I wanted to show a picture that I had gotten and get your comment. But there's a picture of you, and I think is this your swearing in? I don't know if you could see the screen.
It is.
Yeah. So first, is that your husband that's with you?
That's my swearing in.
Okay. And who are the two young men?
That's my husband, and it's my 2 grandsons, Chad and Khalif. They're my grandsons, Chad and Khalif.
So what's interesting is everywhere you go, you see Movita. You also see your 2 grandchildren. I know you love them because I've seen them at a number of events with you, and 2 really well-behaved young men who've heard your story probably more times than they can count, and they sit quietly and listen to their grandmom talk about what I have to imagine is really traumatic for them as well. So you go through and you're up, and what was it like sitting as a representative? And we know that over the last few years, there's been kind of this stalemate up in Harrisburg, and not a lot seems to ever get accomplished there. And I was wondering what your take was on it.
So, you talked about my swearing in, and if you read the prayer done before my swearing in was a travesty. Right, a Republican evangelist state representative did the prayer in the House of Representatives as 55 of my family and friends, all races, all religions, sat in the well of the house. She literally did a fire and brimstone, bend your knee to Jesus prayer. And basically said that I wasn't welcome in the House of Representatives, and I believed her.
Wow.
So I knew that I needed to get to work, and I needed to do what I came up there to do.
Yeah, I remember the story. I remember it appearing in some Philadelphia press that came out. So you were up in Harrisburg for about 6 months as a freshman senator, and most proudest moment that you had while you were serving.
Proudest moment I had was that as a 6-month freshman, I actually was in the House from March to December. And my proudest moment was as soon as I got to Harrisburg, I requested a meeting with the minority leader, who was Frank Dermody at the time. And the leader met with me, and I said, Leader Dermody, you know why I'm here. I said, I care about gun violence. I want to protect the children of Philadelphia. Will you please help me? And he said, Movita, how can I help you? And I said, I've always been an overachiever. So I said, I would like $1 million to take back to Philadelphia for violence prevention. And he said, I can't do $1 million. He said, but let's see if we can get you $500,000. And that was one of the proudest moments with me being in Harrisburg, even the brief time that I was there. Another of the proudest moments for me, Jeff, was that because I'm known as the gun lady, right? People expected that my first piece of legislation would be gun legislation. I intentionally did not make my first piece of legislation gun legislation. My first piece of legislation was actually dignity for incarcerated women.
Wow.
And I created it was. So I actually worked with Representative Morgan Cephas and Summer Lee and Tina Davis, and we're creating a package of bills around dignity for incarcerated women. And my particular piece of legislation was to take the shackles off during childbirth. It was also to create safe housing and space for women and children to bond directly after childbirth, and also making sure that women were not moved far away from their children so that their children would be able to visit them.
Just long overdue legislation. And I've been approached recently about the movement to get some of these bills through, in particular, the use of the availability of feminine products for women inside of our prisons. And I applaud you for taking up that charge, because, wow, these are things that are so outdated, and there's no humanity and no rhyme or reason to them anymore. I wanted to give you some space. So one of the things that frustrated me and remains a little bit is that, when I was indicted and pled guilty to some charges the federal government brought against me, I accepted responsibility and was taken right from the courtroom. And I never really had a chance to say anything about my indictment publicly. I really don't talk about it. I've accepted the charge. I've accepted the sentence. These are things that were through my actions I own, and I've accepted. But I always wondered, if somebody gave me some space to talk about it, what I would say. And I'm going to be really respectful here and just say, I'm giving you some airtime. If you had something that you'd want to say to Philadelphia and to the people listening to this about the next journey that you were on, which was, when you did receive an indictment, and what would you say, or what would you like to share?
So for me, Jeff, that was a very painful time for me. First and foremost, I never wanted to be a politician, and then to have to become a trophy on top of it was very painful for me. I made some mistakes when my son was murdered. I made some legitimate mistakes when my son was murdered. I lived with depression and I lived with PTSD. I was diagnosed at 9 years old. So some of my mistakes were criminalized. And here's the thing, I can't go back, I can't change it. But as you said, words matter. The things that people said to me mattered. And on top of it, there was no space for me to publicly defend myself. I could not, I was forbidden from publicly defending myself. And at this point, to me, it really doesn't matter, right? Because what I realized, thank you for what you said to me the other day, that like pretty much you don't even feel like you need to be in that space. But the one thing that I've realized is like the people who know me and love me did not need an explanation or an excuse. And the people who didn't, there was nothing that I could ever say to convince them of anything other than what was said about me, right? The worst thing for me was that, you know, that a picture was painted of me of who I am not, but how I move shows that that is not who I am. We need to remember like that words have power, right? And words have the power and the ability, it has the power and the ability to inspire, and it also has the power and the ability to deflate and degrade. Right? So I think as a society, we have to become careful, thoughtful deliberators of positive communication. We have to be thoughtful deliberators of how we speak to, for, and about one another. And I thank you for giving me this space, because I've never been able to say anything on my behalf in regards to this instance, right? But here's the thing. I am who I am. Any mistakes that I've made, it is what it is. Like, that's between my God. You know, I pled guilty because I needed to do what I needed to do for my family. It's more important for me to protect my family than to go through this long, drawn out fight where, you know, I had to come up with all this money and it would be all this publicity and it would be more pain to my family. I chose not to do that. I am okay with my choice. I made a choice to accept 3 months of prison. I made a choice to accept 8.5 months of house arrest. I made a choice to accept parole, and it is what it is. You know, it cannot go away from what I've done. It can't take away from the person that I am.
It certainly doesn't. So one of the things I mentioned to you was the line from Martin Luther King that I kind of touches me, and I learned it earlier on my prison bid, was that he had once said that in the end we remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. And when you went to prison, you went at kind of the worst time that anybody could possibly go, was mid-pandemic, and you were right in the heart of it. And I was wondering, first of all, how you doing? Because I know you did were infected while you were inside of the prison, and what was that experience like?
So, you know, a lot of times when things happen to us, we think happening to us and not for us, right? So I kind of have a different perspective. I knew that there was reason that I was going to RCF. There was something positive that had to come out of that situation. And the reality is I found out the day before I had to turn myself in that they were actually thinking about sending me to Lehigh. And me and some friends worked and called the mayor and wound up being sent to RCF on State Road, Riverside Correctional Facility, so that I could be close to my family. But when I went, it was right before COVID hit, right? I went in February 6th of 2020. And it was right before COVID hit, and I went in and I went right to work. Here's the thing, I had to sign a memo because they wanted to put me in protective custody because I was a high profile case. And I actually advocated to be in general population. And I had reminded, the powers that be there that I'm more like the people that reside in Riverside than the ones that work there, right? And the irony for me, Jeff, was that I hadn't been to prison. So I was already a formerly incarcerated person. I hadn't been to prison since 1988. Right? I was arrested in 1988 for selling drugs. But I found myself in RCF and I immediately signed up for a job and I went to work in the kitchen. And several weeks after being at Riverside, the women elected me to be their block rep against my permission. So I wound up being the block rep for G Unit, and I advocated on behalf of the women to the administration, and COVID hit, right? And what was so devastating about COVID hitting was that all of a sudden these women had no access to their families, they had no access to their attorneys, they had no access to their judges, and everything was on a standstill. And I'm so grateful for the relationships that I've been able to develop with people, because it would be me and my husband on the telephone, and he would, call District Attorney Krasner to help us get answers to women's questions. And he would call Kara Gray, the head of the Defenders Association at the time, to help us get answers. So we were able to answer a bunch of those women's questions and concerns through telephone while I was at Riverside.
It's crazy.
I advocated
inside the walls.
Yeah. So I was the block rep, right? So I was advocating. And then oh my God, Jeff, when it went on shutdown and the women were in the cells like 23 hours and 45 minutes every day, I fought to get them their time out so that they could get their time on the telephone to check in with their families, that I let them know that they were okay. I fought, to ensure that they got their shower time. And it wasn't a lot of time, but it was some time outside of those cell doors, right? And that's actually how I got COVID. I was running from cell to cell to cell. After I worked for 8 hours in the kitchen, I would come to the unit and run from cell to cell to cell to sign women up for their shower time and their phone time, and literally be demanding with the COs that they let these women get what they need, right? And that's how I actually got COVID.
Wow.
And I worked through COVID. I got my first symptom of COVID on April 1st. And I got every symptom except for the fever. And I told the authorities that I had COVID. I said, I have it. I said, I've lost my sense of taste. I lost my sense of smell. I had this hacking cough. I had body aches. I mean, every symptom except the fever. And they just kept testing temperature. I don't have the fever. I have every symptom. And I went to work every day with COVID.
Wow. That's crazy. Just crazy. We only have a few minutes left, but before we go, and I hate ending on a really sad note, but I did want to give some space for this too. On March 5th, you went through another tragedy, and I was wondering if you were okay sharing a little bit about what happened.
Yes. So, my surviving son, Dante, who was 29 years old, he was 30 years old. Hold on 1 minute.
Yep.
Yancy. He just walked in the door. He didn't know I was on the show.
No worries. Tell him I said
my
hi.
surviving son, Dante, who has been on the... Okay, I will.
Okay.
My son, Dante, has been on the front line with me in the gun violence fight for the last 10 years since he lost his brother and his best friend. And my son, Dante, was he was the best father I've ever seen in my life. And I am not exaggerating. I mean, just his ability to be so open and loving with his children was amazing for me to watch, right? And my son, what I did was, when I was indicted, I brought my family back together. I brought everybody back home because I wanted them to be together to support another. And then we had a tragedy. We were putting a new roof on, and a storm came through on August 4th, and it literally stormed in my house. So we were displaced in Roxborough. And my son was home at the time, and he went for a trip to California, and he was just there for the weekend, Jeff. He left me on Thursday, March 4th. He kissed me. He told me he loved me and that he would see me later. And then the next day he was killed in a random drive-by in California.
Wow. Yeah. Movita, you've been through so much, and our deepest sympathies for the loss of your son, of Dante. And I know we're running close on time, but I did want to just extend our deepest sympathies to you, to your entire family, and to let you know that the community is with you, and we're listening, And we appreciate everything that you've done for us and the messaging, and we hope you're going to continue it in the future. We so appreciate you being and taking some time out. I'd love to continue the conversation. I want to invite you on again and again and again, and continue to do some work with you, especially in some of our areas that need it, and see if we can conquer this this gun violence problem and some of the challenges that we have in Philadelphia. So from the bottom of all of our hearts, our deepest sympathies to you. But I have to tell you, you're a shining star in Philadelphia, and we appreciate you, and we're glad that you're back in our community. So I want to give a shout out. We have a few seconds left also to Lou Narvaez, and thank Lou for being on today. Looking Forward is blessed with some great guests, and we're going to see you in a few more weeks. So we're going to be all out, and thanks everybody.